B, observation of self-consciousness in its purity and in its relation to external actuality, logical and psychological laws. Observation will now turn to self-consciousness and try to find laws and universality there. Logical laws. The object of observation is now self-consciousness in its purity as pure thought and the laws of pure thought, such as identity, non-contradiction, and the excluded middle. Hegel begins here by alluding to the transition from nature to spirit he discusses at the close of his Science of Nature. The concept, or universal as genus, in nature is realized in the animal organism, but only inadequately, because nature is the domain only of sheer individuals, and because the concept is not yet freely for itself. It achieves this for the first time in spirit or mind when the genus or universal becomes thought. Hegel next repeats the truth stated in the earlier section on understanding, that thoughts, the concept's form, contains also the content, all content, within itself, and thus is also all reality and all that exists. The problem here concerns the empirical, psychological way observation takes up the form of thought and its laws. Quote, observation gives these laws the character of something found or given, and that merely is, and as a multitude of detached necessities with a fixed content, end quote. That the laws of thought are something found means first that they are without necessity. At most, they perhaps show us how we do happen to think, but not that we must necessarily think in these ways. Second, the fact that these laws are separated and detached from one another contradicts the unity of self-consciousness and of thought and form in general. The real truth of these laws of thought and of all thought determinations is that they are simply, quote, vanishing moments in the unity of thought, end quote. Something which receives its verification in speculative philosophy or the science of logic, where Hegel, in fact, even points out that these so-called laws not only contradict each other, but that no one on the planet thinks in accordance with them. Cf. the law of identity, according to which, quote, a plant is a plant. The moon is the moon, etc. The science of logic, Hegel concludes, is just the development of the one thought, the concept, in which these laws are shown to be only, quote, single vanishing moments whose truth is only the whole movement of thought, which Hegel in fact says is knowing itself, end quote. Psychological laws of social psychology. The key here is found in Hegel's opening statement that, quote, psychology contains the collection of laws in accordance with which spirit relates itself in various ways to the various modes of its actuality as an otherness already given, end quote. The mistake of psychology is to assume that the two sides of its laws are already given and independently existent apart from each other, when in fact they are inextricably fused with each other. For psychology, on the one side is the individual spirit with his distinct character traits, faculties, inclinations, passions, existing, quote, in the mind like things in a bag, end quote. On the other side are the mores of its society, the given circumstances, habits, customs, religion, and ways of thinking of the social world confronting it. The problem is that the individual can act either passively or actively towards the world. Passively, it, quote, allows free play to the stream of the actual world flowing in upon it, end quote, thereby conforming to the world. Actively, it breaks off this stream and transforms it. It opposes and rebels against the world, making the world conform to itself. Hence, because of the contingency involved in how the individual will choose to react to the world and its mores, actively or passively, there can be no determinist laws between the two. Laws which can explain why the individual behaves as he does. Laws lacking universality and necessity are not laws. A mores or custom cannot dictate that all individuals will accept and conform to it, or that all will reject it. Nor can psychology know how a character trait or passion will influence an individual's behavior toward a given more, which totally depends on how he reacts to it. It is the individual who has the final say. Hegel concludes by saying, not only are no psychological laws between the two sides possible because they are indifferent to each other, but in fact, there are no two sides, no separate given sides or realities to speak of. There is only one reality, quote, the unity of the world as given and the world the individual has made, end quote. In fact, and this is the principle of modern philosophy, there is no world as such. Rather, only the or a world in and for a consciousness. That is, there is only the world of the individual or of individuals. C. Observation of the relation of self-consciousness to its immediate actuality, physiognomy and phrenology. Observation, unable to find a law and correlation between what a person is and does, his inner character, and the outer social world, will now turn logically inwards. It will now try to find laws which connect a person's inner character and his body, or immediate actuality, and consider the person by himself, independently of the social world. Namely, his facial features, the object of physiognomy, promoted by J.C. Lavater, and the features of his skull, the object of phrenology, promoted by D.F.G. Gao. In brief, the physiognomist claims to possess laws which correlate the outer lines and features of one's face with one's inner character and intentions. The problem is, the physiognomist is not able to observe or perceive one's inner self, only one's face. Hence, quote, the laws it discovers tell us nothing. It is idle chatter, or merely the voicing of one's opinion, end quote. The phrenologist believes he can tell what a person is really like just by observing the bumps and hollows of his skull. This bump indicates a murderer, this hollow a cuckold, etc. Here too, these correlations turn out to be just an opinion. Also, when inner and outer conflict and plainly refute his law, the person should act like a rogue but does not, the phrenologist will claim that this bump in disposition has not yet been developed, i.e., quote, is not present, but it ought to be present, end quote. The phrenologist thus plainly admits that a person's character cannot be revealed by his skull. The conclusion is that a thing, the skull, cannot show what self-consciousness, which is not inert but active, is. Hence, consciousness will no longer aim to find itself immediately, but to produce itself by its own activity, end quote. Finally, that self-consciousness, the I, is a thing, a skull, means that the category is realized, that self-consciousness, the I, is all reality. I equals thing, and thing equals I. This is, as Hegel says, an infinite judgment, which means that the I and the thing are completely identical, one and the same. See the Encyclopedia Logic, paragraph 215. The subject-object unity results in infinite subjectivity, not infinite objectivity. As Hegel says in the Phenomenology's preface, quote, to know myself is to know the object, and to know the object is to know myself, end quote. And in the Science of Logic, quote, the idea no longer has the object over against it, but has internalized it and knows the object as its own self, end quote. The key, which many commentators miss, is that up till this point in the phenomenology, the sense thing was only appearance or non-being. Now, the thing is I, self-consciousness, or myself. Hence, I am literally all reality. Indeed, in the last paragraph of the Phenomenology, Hegel tells us, as does Fichte and Schelling as well, that spirit, Geist, our true self, is the entire universe. Quote, spirit exists equally in its extension, nature, and in its depth, the self, end quote. Next time, we will take up B, active reason, and C, practical reason, and make our transition to BB, spirit. We will also see the beginning of the achievement of reciprocal recognition, but only the beginning. Thank you.